The Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mysteries of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, and today on the podcast I'm connecting with Danielle Dulsky, author of Woman Most Wild, 3 Keys for Liberating the Witch Within. Today, though, we're focused on Danielle's second book, The Holy Wild, a Heathen Bible for the Untamed Woman. In this conversation, we talk about ancestral inheritance and its influence on our spellcraft, as well as mothering as witchcraft, and we touch on the effects of whiteness, capitalism, and patriarchy on our spiritual practice. It's definitely a toothsome conversation, and I found Danielle very relatable, and I suspect you will too. And so here's my conversation with Danielle Dulsky.
So Danielle, what identities do you lead with?
I am first and foremost a witch, and maybe secondarily so storyteller. Sometimes those go together. I'm a mother. I am an artist, and I'm a mischief maker.
Then it's fitting then that your book Holy Wild is full of other mischief making archetypes. In your book, you offer a revisionist. It's called Revisionist, I think, on the liner notes, but I would almost say a remembering or, a rediscovering of mythologies of a number of dark goddesses. And some of them are really popular or becoming more Instagram popular, like Lilith and Mary Magdalene. But there's also some that for many of us are perhaps a bit less well known, like Salome and Jezebel and the Mother of Babylon. I'm curious, if you had to pick one at this time in your life that you feel most in solidarity with, who would that be? And could you tell us her story?
I love that question. For a very long time in my life, I felt very Lilith, and I realized maybe sometime early summer that I no longer feel as, what I would associate with the Lilith archetype as maybe rage-filled, righteously rage-filled. Mm-hmm. But for a long time I did. And now I think I would say I identify most with the Mother of Babylon, or the whore of Babylon, as she is in the Bible. She, in the book of Revelation, she's the, epitome of all, she's the mother of all abominations, right? And harlots. And she has this beast that's, tattooed and was the hallmark of evil, according to my born again Christian upbringing. And so I just remember being so intrigued by this one figure who could embody like all things evil but be different than the devil, and somehow also be a harbinger of the end times, right? And thinking that was just so interesting. And so I've increasingly identified more and more with her. When I was traveling, it was like the summer of 2017, I was traveling in London, and I went to this great witch shop there that's so old, called the Atlantis Bookshop, like older than anything we have here in the United States. And they had her picture, like just this hand-drawn picture of the Mother of Babylon on the wall. And I thought, that's me. That looks just like me. So I think I would have to say the Mother of Babylon. I mean, in the Holy Wild, her story is written as if she's a prophetess. So she's the archetype that I introduce in the Book of Fire. So even though the Book of Fire, the rituals and the ceremonies and the verses, they are kind of angry and rage-filled, I feel that the revisioning of her story isn't so much about anger as it is about action, and not performative action, but like the real action that people might not see. And also one of the things that she says in the revision tale is don't look to me to tell you what to do. You know, she has all of these people kind of come to her and be like, tell us what to do. And she's like, you know what to do already. So go out and do it. And it's funny, I was thinking about that tale the other day, because when I recorded the audiobook for The Holy Wild, it was 1 year ago on election day when I was reading that like revision tale. And I just like couldn't get through it without crying. Like they had to keep stopping the recording and then starting it again. Because it was like, I was feeling it so much. This like, go out and vote. And that's like a line in the story too. Out vote them, out dance them, out pray them. So yeah, so I'm feeling very Mother of Babylon to answer your question.
How do you relate to her as a mother?
Yes. So I am the mother of 2 white boys. And so trying to raise them to, you know, to be the change agents that I think they can be. And, you know, trying to navigate what that means in this world right now. But I do think, you know, the Mother of Babylon is a truth teller, and I try to just tell them the truth as much as possible. And a lot of that includes telling them when I feel I've screwed up as a mother, which I know that my mother didn't do a lot for me. Yeah, I think that there's a level of helping them navigate the world as soon to be white men, and being, and not trying to hide anything from them, right? Because, you know, trying to tell them the whole world's been set up for you. and so here's what you can do to make it better and more you know, more equal for those that don't look like you or have all of the, you know, paths laid out before them that you do. And they're only 10 and 13. And I don't really feel like I've said anything too soon. I feel like everything that I tell them, they are like, yeah, we get it. So, yeah, so there's some kind of intersection between the end times and being able to teach your young white boys what it means to be privileged. And yeah.
Well, and that many stories that nobody else is going to tell them are becoming more and more important for the continuation even of humans as a species. And so the stories that they know, or that everybody will want to reinforce for them, or not everybody, but much of the Western capitalist patriarchal world is going to want to, how fortunate for all of us that, you know, you have an example, you are an example of a different way of doing that, and how to inoculate them from that trance that they can fall under the spell of white supremacy and patriarchy. I really enjoyed the part of the book where you wrote about spellcraft, and this is a quote: "A priestess must consider how her magic is a conversation with the global community and the universal order of things." So you provide this very clarifying question that practitioners can ask themselves before conducting their magic, which is, how is my having this positively affecting the world? And so I'm thinking about your parenting as a form of magical practice. Even, you know, you're doing a lot of unbinding and casting new spells. When you consider the influences of whiteness and capitalists on even just how we're learning about magic and witchcraft these days, like, have you found ways to highlight that within your work to, you know, ensure that priestesses don't succumb also to that wave of spiritual materialism that's delivered via Instagram these days?
Yeah. I do think that is the center point of my work as a witch and teacher, is that if witches always want proof that their spells work, right? And so we can always start there. So no matter what the nature of their tradition is, we always want proof that what we're doing works. It's not a tradition of blind faith, right? And so what I usually tell people is that your magic is so much more effective when you acknowledge that it's a dance between yourself and then all that is. So one of the kind of poisons of what I would call traditional Wicca, or maybe the more palatable witchcraft, is this idea that it's, you as witch so strong, manipulating all of the energies in order to get what you want. And that's just such a tiny, so superficial part of it that, if you approach it in that way, I don't know if you're going to cause much harm, because it won't be that effective anyway, right? So if you're looking for your magic to actually work and be something that weaves you into the world in which you live, then it's important to acknowledge not only the light and the dark, but everything in between. So non-duality, and that your magic is a conversation. So it's all about energy exchange. So one of the examples that I tend to offer is this idea of working with deity. So you don't have to work with deity in order to be a witch or anything. But if you do, then the deities of your ancestries, they're kind of like these deep wells of energy that people have made deposits of prayer into, or drumming, or all of the things that they've done, all of the ceremonies and rituals have made these tiny deposits into this great big account that is this deity that would be like your ancestral inheritance. So every time I clean my altar for Danu, who's one of the Celtic goddesses that I work with, I'm making another deposit into that well. But if I were to say, like, I'm going to call on Kali to remove all of my obstacles, and I've never made any deposits into her account, and nor have my ancestors made any deposits into her account, then it's just not going to be effective. It's not going to work, because it's about balance. So I haven't paid anything in, and so I'm asking to get something back, and I won't, right? So magic is always about conversation. It's always about putting in and taking out, and being sovereign within the collective. So we can be totally sovereign creatures and sovereign witches, and yet exist within this collective. And so when you attach your personal magic to something that's bigger than you, it will be, it's not only a good thing to do, right? Good manners, but it'll also be that much more effective.
Absolutely. Can I follow up on this? Because I can imagine that a lot of the white witches right now listening are going, how did you discern what was right relationship then, or what was a good mutual exchange? And I'm personally wondering, did you have mentors along the path who revealed to you your whiteness and like maybe, and I'm also curious about folks who then, let's say they're white of European ancestry, and they're thinking right now, oh, well, I've put lots of deposits into, the Native American spirituality because I've been to tons of sweat lodges or something like that, so can you actually just keep talking a little bit more about this unpacking and right relationship with whiteness and your spirituality?
Yeah, I think, in terms of how did I figure it out, I made a ton of mistakes. And I've always been pretty like investigative with my witchcraft, so if I tried to spell and I felt like I put all I had into it and then it didn't work, I would go back and be like, well, why didn't that work? And by the same extension, if I did a spell and it felt very good while I was doing it and it worked, then that was the path that I followed. So I think that that's kind of the first step is you do have to be a little bit of a detective, and you take inventories and you journal and you write things. So there is an element of discipline to it, which I think that maybe the softer Instagrammy witchcraft that you were talking about before sometimes misses. I mean, it's hard work. It's not like something that you do when you have 5 minutes. I mean, you can do it then also, but you know what I'm saying. It does take actual work to be able to make these energetic investments. So that, and in terms of, I do think that it's possible to make deposits into accounts that aren't necessarily yours. I think the sticky thing is when you're teaching them and making money off of them. I think that it's always about having a teacher that is indigenous to that tradition to tell you what's right and what's not, and what you have the right to do and what you don't, and to always look at it as a signal within yourself, like an embodied signal. If you get told no, how do you receive that? And if you receive it not well, then maybe that's not the path for you, right? So there's a necessary humility to following these traditions that don't run in our blood. So what I usually tell newer witches is that when you're working with traditions of your own ancestry, it's like the door's already open for you there, so it's much easier to walk through and figure out what feels right for you and what will be part of your path and what won't be. It doesn't have to be like, well, this is in my blood, I must do it. It doesn't have to be that either, right? But it is an easier road to walk.
And I know for me personally, what I have found is it's almost obviousness after the fact when you start to learn about your own ancestral practices that you probably are already doing them, or you were probably already drawn to them. There was probably already some kind of thing that made you like take that random course that time, or, go to that place when you were backpacking when you were 17, and now here you are 44 being like, oh my God, that was, I'm doing my genealogy and that's where my people were from. Like I had no idea. Right. So that can be kind of a fun sort of scavenger hunt too, is to like learn about your ancestry if you know what it is. In the section of the book called The Book of Fire, which you mentioned earlier, you wrote a part called Blessed Be the Hearth-Holding Women, the Heathen's Right to Rest. And as you've been talking about the work and the discipline, I feel like it really connects. But also that was a part of the book that when I read it, I could tell that a part of me really needed to read it and like really connected and needed to hear that. It's definitely challenging for me to like stop creating, stop moving forward, stop resisting oppression, like not keep working to build resilience for me and my community. It's just, especially in the face of climate collapse and sort of converging emergencies that have a really high sense of urgency. And I'm guessing also that a lot of my listeners need to hear that message too. Can you share why you wrote that part and what you want people to know about this aspect of working with the fire element, this kind of interesting paradox between fire and rest?
Yeah. I think that, we can only take so much. We can only do so much. And the time of year, pre-Yule coming up toward winter solstice, it is this time of void. And the void is something that I tend to, with all that I am, and it does take strategy, because by nature I am not a restful woman. and I do have a deep, deep part of me that if I get under my fear enough of resting, it's like, I feel that if I'm not creating something, that I'm going to die. Like that's how like deep seated this sense of, always keep moving, always keep fighting is within me. And I know that I'm not the only one who feels that way. And also, like, if I'm not, I realized this a year or so ago, that if I'm not fighting something, I will create a fight because I feel like, I don't even know who I am if I'm not fighting something. So I'm saying all of that, as a caveat, that I am no beacon of restfulness, right? So this is my medicine as well. this time of void, like our best medicine is rest and reflection and these tiny rituals that don't deplete our resources, because all of society is just on the verge of telling us to fill the void with shopping and sugar and parties and, you know, all of the things that happen during the holidays. So and like we're made to feel guilty when we don't do that. And I think that the same is sometimes true with activism and also witchcraft, where it's like, you know, well, who are you if you're not fighting something? Well, I'm human, and I just need a minute, right? I think that, you know, that what people say sometimes about having to fill your well up so that you have something to give, like fill up your own cauldron so you have something to give. That's absolutely true. And I think that as I get older, so I'm almost 40, and I'm feeling that more and more, like this real attunement to when I need to step back and not be seen for a while, and you know, try to figure out like what I really believe, right? And re-examine and reflect and all of that. I'm really attuned to that now, much more so than I used to be, maybe even, you know, 5 years ago, where it was like, well, you said this before, so this has to be what you still believe. Just keep going, keep running. So constant reassessment of who you are and what your sacred work is in the world requires a lot of rest. And so, yes.
Yeah, it is really easy to burn out. And I think a lot of us do struggle with that paradox between, especially with the social media piece. I have learned so much about what I believe in and about activism and about mobilization through the people that I'm following on social and that I've become like real friends with. It's, you know, what people say about that's not a real relationship and you can't co-regulate over digital is that's false. That's just not true, because I do it all the time. But there is that tension between also just getting burnt out, like your nervous system's just too much stimulation and also too much conflicting information, and the burnout of just like, I don't even know what I believe anymore because this doesn't feel quite right. And now the fight is within me instead of out there. And that's just exhausting. So I really appreciated that part. And then you move finally in the last part of the book to the book of ether. Can you talk about some of the themes there?
Yeah, ether, it's the most difficult book to talk about out of the 5 elements, right? Because it kind of transcends language, but it is the unseen forces. And I say unseen because they're not readily seen, but I do think, you know, people that are clairvoyant or more attuned to the subtle energies can see them. So I get asked about that a lot. You know, people that are like, well, I can see ghosts and I can see fairies. And I was like, well, not everyone can. Right?
Yeah.
But good for you. And so the ether is, it's the place where we don't have all the answers. It's the place where mystery lives. It is less tangible. It is very akin to the dream realm and the collective unconscious. So, you know, it's difficult to describe, but it is, you know, at this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, we're just moving into that place of requiring the dark and requiring quiet. And I've done all sorts of psychic and mediumship trainings over the years, and that's always like one of the first lessons of the better trainings is that you need stillness and darkness in order to really be able to hear and attune to the messages that you're receiving that aren't so in your face. So that is the ethereal realm, and we don't live there, right? It's ether is space. in Ayurveda, ether is space, and we're just always trying to fill the spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to try to not fill the spaces. There's this great line in The Witch of Portobello. Have you read that book?
Nope.
It's so good. It's fiction, but The Witch of Portobello. He says, like, there's a witch who's trying to learn calligraphy, and she thinks that she's mastered it. And then her elder teacher says, well, you've mastered the letters, but you haven't mastered the spaces in between the letters. And it's like, that's it. That's the answer to everything.
That's so interesting, because I think those of us who were born or feel like we were born with a really highly developed spiritual yearning can have a very high degree of comfort with the mystery. But one of the beautiful things about it is, just like you said in the start of this, that we don't know all the answers. And there's a kind of deliciousness in finally being in a place where actually something that I haven't anticipated could occur. There's a deliciousness to that when you're somebody who's like really good at patterning or tracking, or has this very strong intuition and sixth sense about the world, that actually going into the darkness and finding your edge where you don't know is challenging and beautiful, and can be uncomfortable, but in a good direction.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
When you were writing this book, what did you want people to know about integrating all of the 5 elements within them? Like, what are the main themes you hope people will take away from reading The Holy Wild?
I think when I was writing it, and then in reflecting on writing it, it's not so much about integrating all the elements as it is about knowing that you can feel drawn more toward one at a certain time of the year or in your life, and then cycle and come around. We can feel very fiery sometimes and then come to the place of rest and ether, and that's okay. And so there's kind of this rich palette in nature that is the elements, and it's okay if you feel a little bit more blue one day and red another day. And I think that people that are that are coming to witchcraft, and certainly when I was coming to witchcraft in my 20s, that I really wish I had been told that it's okay if you wake up one day and you're like, I'm not a witch today, and I don't care that it's the full moon, and right, and that would be fine. And it doesn't mean that you have to throw the whole thing out. It's just that we are cyclical creatures and we change all the time. So it's not so much about attending to all of the elements at once as it is knowing that they do all live and cycle within us all the time, just like they do in nature. And so if you find yourself feeling more of an affiliation to one than the other, that's fine, and run with that, right? And then the other important piece that I was really focused on while I was writing the book was that I wanted it to be about these revision stories of the traditionally condemned women, and how they meet your own story. Because of the way that I was raised, it was difficult to accept the parts of myself that I was told were shameful, that I was given stories of women as like teaching tools. And it's like, this is why this is shameful. So in going back and revisioning the stories, and it's like, well, maybe the mother of Babylon wasn't this beacon of all things evil. Maybe the end times are good.
Yeah.
So I wanted it to be about where the story of the archetype meets the story of the reader. And so that's why the opportunities to journal on their own, the reader's own lived experience is in there, because to me that is more important than anything that might be in the book, is just considering how the stories of these archetypes are your story or the reader's story.
Yeah. And I think those of us who do have a strong affinity for some of, what I've called the dark women archetypes, or, those kind of difficult women in the back row going, excuse me, I have a comment, or who just won't let it go. It's like me at my neighborhood meeting last night, and so it, unpopular and uncomfortable for many, but some of us do just feel these strong affinities, and it's so nice to hear these stories. And then when they are framed in such a way that we can befriend those parts of ourselves, there's almost a biological feeling of rightness about it, that it's like, right, I don't actually think this is how the story was written. I gotta think that's a patriarchal overlay. And this sounds a lot more right to me. So I really, really appreciate you doing all of that work, and really, obviously, you really connected with and embodied and befriended those archetypes, because the verses are really beautiful, and so are the rituals. So how did you, when you were writing, and how do you now personally manage grief and rage, maybe partly in just the fact that we've had to work so hard to fucking resurface these stories and elbow some space, and we continue to see the rolling back of women's rights, and on the one hand we're more visible perhaps politically, or in corporate or different places, but on the other hand things are being stolen away. There's a real slapback. So how do you cope with the grief and rage of that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost I try to validate those two things in me, and so if I'm trying to run away from either grief or rage, that that's something that has to be looked at and then stopped, because I do feel like I kind of live in grief, rage, and gratitude. Maybe those are the three states that I live in all the time, but equally so. And grief and gratitude, those very much are twins for me. But grief, I don't know. I've been really cautious of not drinking my grief. I did a training with Dr. Estes over the summer, and that was what she said, don't drink your grief when you leave here. And I thought, wow, that's something that my Irish blood really loves doing, is drinking my grief. But there's this practice that my dear friend Shine Blackhawk introduced me to, which is just a primal yell that is ugly. I mean, not the ones that sound like you're acting, right? The real deep, the only other time I sound that way is when I was in labor. That's the only time I can be. So there's a real from the belly, very low pitched just the sound of rage, right? Bone rattling. And I don't feel that I need to do it regularly. I feel like for me, it's once every couple of weeks. I don't know that it's medicine that would serve everyone. but for me, being able to let that part of my voice that I never let erupt, let that out, especially in nature, because the trees can hold it and the ground can hold it. That's been something that's been really good rage medicine for me.
That's fantastic. I if I were walking through the woods and heard your primal rage scream, I'd be like, yes, somebody's having it and doing it. That's so good. Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for also not just taking the time, but writing a book and birthing that creative project and bringing forth that particular body of work. I can only imagine, as somebody who probably has worked through the witch wound, but the burning times never ended, as they say. And so you brought this forth, and there's quite a lot of exposure that goes with that. But I just want to express my gratitude. It's so wonderful to read the revisionist stories and have them speak my mind, so I really appreciated that. Thanks so much, Danielle.
Thank you, Carmen.
Wow, we covered a lot in that half hour, didn't we? We'll have to have Danielle back soon to talk about her forthcoming third title, Seasons of Moon and Flame, The Wild Dreamer's Journey of Becoming, to be released on March 10th, 2020. It's available now for pre-order. I've been reading an advance copy, and I am loving the focus on crone, hag, and elder stories. Links for Danielle's website, online courses, and books can be found in the show notes at numinouspodcast.com. Today, I'd like to thank the listeners I have discovered in Iceland. What is that? Please go over to my Instagram and say hello. I would love to know how the Icelanders, how you came across my podcast. I'm fascinated. And everyone else, hey, if you'd like to add your thoughts to our conversation, same thing. Hop onto Instagram and find this show's post in my feed. You'll find me by name at Carmen Spagnola, CarmenSpagnola. Just come say hello and tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to continue the conversation with you over there. Until next time, take care.